can't survive without AI. AI will be the tool that amplifies us to be able to deal with the challenges of the future. So much of my time now is spent talking about the book and its content and speaking on it. And I do a bit of teaching occasionally and some consulting and mentoring and a little tiny bit of investing in some local companies. That's a thumbnail on me.
Great.
Super. Very good.
So thanks again for having me on this broadcast. And, taking up from Tom's comment a couple of weeks ago, I was in India and somebody sent me a message and said, "You guys are looking really like you're having a good time." It reminded me of the days back when we were rocking and rolling, in the immortal words of Jethro Tull, "Too old to rock and roll, too young to die." So it's all about today, right? It's all about today, and it's about how IEEE in particular has shaped who I am and where I am today. And the mission of IEEE, and I'm sure John Havens can talk to this more eloquently, Sunil and George and Tom, advancing technology for humanity. To me, that equation is not balanced until humanity is on that right-hand side of the equation, speaking like an engineer. So you can advance technology all you want, but as long as the humanitarian considerations are not explicitly included, addressed, recognized, we are at peril to look at the consequences of the technology. So as an academic, as an IEEE member, it's been my honor and privilege to work with incredible minds like you and learn from you, because every single student that I've had the honor and privilege of working with, I've learned something, and I continue to learn. One of the programs that I'm very passionate about here in California, I live in Southern California right now, is a program designed to help first-generation students or first in their families to go to college. And of course, there's a lot of AI, a lot of information out there. People are putting out dashboards and things like that, but the emotional component needs to be addressed in order for learning to be enhanced for students coming from these backgrounds. So that's been a passion of mine, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go along. IEEE, of course, with the global initiative, is very engaged in this. We are looking at ultimately perhaps creating standards that can guide us, that can help us as we go along. I mean, this is a journey we've just started, right? I mean, this journey is just beginning in my mind. 20 years from now, if we have this Google Hangout, it'll be a very, very interesting conversation. So glad to be here.
So a quick little introduction I think I need to do about Ramesh as well. What he has not actually touched upon is his long career till now. I mean, it's not nowhere close to an end, but he has been the dean till he took actually a sabbatical for very good reasons, that he got a lot of funding to get this EPICS program that he runs under IEEE. But he's taken a sabbatical from being the dean of engineering at California State University in Northridge, California. Am I right, Ramesh?
Yes, thank you, Sunil. Appreciate it.
All right,
Great.
George, we are on now.
Yeah, so I think we should just roll along, and if John joins me, we'll just get him on board. All right. So, what do you guys think about the current state of data capturing, management, and use in terms of the emotional part of capturing emotions?
So who's taking that? You already know, I have already given the introduction that I was the guy who kind of detracted and said, well, it's I don't know why it's being done, because I see it as a double-edged sword anyway. And I see the sharper edge actually going more towards in favor of picking out all that data, and to the detriment of the people whose emotions are captured. So that's a particular view that I've taken. I'm kind of trying to rock the boat or throw a spanner in the works. So that's where I'll leave it. Now let's see where Ramesh thinks or Tom thinks it should be going.
Well, one thought that comes to mind, and I'll use an example here, so the field of assistive technology engineering, which is to help improve the quality of life for people and using technology in that process. So a couple of years ago, we were working on a project, to help people who are physically challenged, who are wheelchair bound, to be able to move, but using their thoughts to move the wheelchair. So this is an interesting project, and it came about really from a group of students that had won some competitions in robotics that said, we use headsets in our day-to-day competitions, and we now use the same technology to be able to translate human thoughts into a motion command without any latency. Now, what I'm really proud about is that none of this data was being transmitted to the cloud and back. So they addressed the issues of privacy. They built the computing on the platform itself. So none of it was being sent outside in order to ensure that the individual had control over it. It was a very rudimentary system, if you can think about video gamers these days and how they use headsets. And they use that in the same fashion. But what is truly remarkable is that this now allows the individual, simply by thinking that they want to move, so they looked at the EEG waveforms, they worked with a neurologist to be able to get physical signatures, built a neural network, and then did the algorithm, embedded all of that on a computer that was sitting on the wheelchair itself to give this individual control over his or her motions. So when it comes to data capture, George, to your question, I see two sides to it. We have pushed the envelope in terms of computing power, right? We get faster computers, we can store information in the cloud, and so forth. The question then becomes one of privacy and security. Who has access to that? And how does the individual control that access? That to me is very important as an engineer. So when I'm designing a system, I want to be thinking about how that information is being controlled by the individual who is benefiting from that, because otherwise, in my mind, it opens the door to all kinds of other issues. Tom, I don't know if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful, Ramesh, that's a wonderful point on which to sort of take off and segue. One of the things that we talk about in the book, in my book, Revealing the Invisible, is this whole notion of the digital self. And my biggest concern with the digital self is that today, I don't own my digital self. You don't own your digital self. None of us own our digital selves. They are owned in part by Facebook, in part by Apple, in part by Microsoft, so on and so forth. In a very fragmented way, my digital self exists somewhere out in the digital ecosystem. I'm a strong believer that in order for us to truly make the next advance in artificial intelligence, to make the next advance in how we extract value from these digital assets that we are creating through my behaviors, which are being captured, because these are assets to someone. My behavior is now an asset to someone, just not to me. I'm convinced that to make that next leap, you have to somehow give ownership of that digital asset, that digital self, back to its rightful owner. And look, we do this with property rights. We do this with every other kind of asset that we value in the developed world. Many economists will tell you that the foundational elements of any true capitalist system, a healthy capitalist system, are rights to ownership, right? Fernando de Soto, the famous Peruvian economist, talked about the fact that all advanced societies are based on this premise of the immutability of ownership. I don't own my digital self. So how can I truly have a digital future, a digital economy, if I don't own my digital self? So I think that's one very important piece of this that we should explore and talk about. The other thing I would say just briefly, because George, when you asked this question about emotions and AI and computing, my fear is no matter how I answer that question, someone will say, oh, but you're not answering the right question because it's so broad. It's such a large playing field, right? So the one thing I would say is we're already beginning to do that, but we're using surrogates of emotion. So my online digital behaviors are not really my emotions. My facial expressions are not really my emotions. They're sort of surrogates for my emotions. And at the end of the day, what makes us human is not our intelligence. It's not our behaviors. It's not the data you capture about me. What makes us intelligent is that we are emotional beings. That is how we connect. That is how we relate to the world and to each other. And ultimately, I think emotion is perhaps the single greatest thing you can know about me and be able to exhibit in connecting to me. So I still look at AI and ask myself the question, when will AI truly get me emotionally and begin to sort of exhibit emotions, not just behaviors? So sort of an advanced Turing test, the next level of the Turing test, if you will, is how can we connect emotionally with AI? Because at that point, in my mind, things have really, really changed. But boy, getting back to what Ramesh said, I sure hope that at that point I own my emotional digital self, because if I don't, it will be abused and mangled and leveraged in horrible ways I don't even want to begin to think about.
Indeed. Very true.
So just joining us is Omar.
Hello.
Hey, hi guys.
I'll just
Hi,
do a
Omar.
quick intro on Omar, and I got a message from John. He's just about to connect. So Omar is a friend of mine. He's a philosopher in residence here in the Tech. He's one of the original guys who started this thing, and I asked him to join us just to have his perspective on the topic.
Very good, excellent. This is the first time I've heard something like philosopher in residence. I love that. I really love that.
To give you the whole idea came out because I was actually the attorney in house. I was foreman law, and this was a project that started up as a spinoff, and I got to find it, got to get involved, and everyone mentioned that I was like playing an entrepreneur role, and I definitely told it not necessarily. I'm just like trying to do what I think is best to make this thing come up. And then someone said that I was playing the role of a CEO, and then I'm not the CEO. I just make people think, and that's why I came up with a, you know what? I'm just the philosopher in residence. I'm the one that throws out questions and tries to make the why out of everything, and that's how we came up with that idea. And one day I just said it like, just call me the philosopher in residence, but said it as a joke. Next thing I saw it, I even had a business card with it.
That's brilliant.
Hey, John, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
So John Heavens has joined us as well. Hi, John.
Yeah, how you doing?
Hi, John. Good
Hi,
to
John.
meet you virtually.
Yeah, sorry I'm late, but thank you so much for the invite. I really appreciate it.
Nice to see you again, John.
Yeah, good to see you too.
So should I just throw the question around again? Because both John and Omar got here right after
Right.
we
Yeah.
got. So the question was posed is, what is the current state of data capturing, management, and use, and what do you think about it as a way to capture people's emotions?
The current, Jorge, I didn't give you the current state of what?
Of data capture.
Okay.
As it pertains to human emotions.
And George, I think we should give John a quick opportunity to introduce himself.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Please, John, can you just give us a quick introduction for the others, benefit of others?
Oh, sure, and thank you. So I'm executive director of a program at IEEE. IEEE is the world's largest technology association. It's in about 160 countries with more than 500,000 members. It's basically the heart of the engineering community. I'm executive director of a program for the IEEE Standards Association called the IEEE Global Initiative for the Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems.
Very
Thank
cool.
you.
Very cool. So who wants to go after the question? I think we heard from Tom and Ramesh. I think Sunil, did you put your 2 cents in?
Well, am I on your side or am I on their side? Or are we all on
Not humanity, my friend.
No, I think I'll pass. Whenever I already have the bad habit of jumping in uninvited. So yeah, let's flow with it. I think let's give John and Omar a stab
Cool.
at the question on the
Cool.
current state of data capture. Yep.
Did you want me to go or Omar? Either way.
Either way.
John, I'd love you to go before. I'm a little bit shy.
Okay. So I guess if by data capture you mean how is humans' data essentially sort of tracked and accessed in general up until the GDPR and still largely around the world, certainly in the States, the idea of consent, there's the terms and conditions that you consent to. I believe the model is essentially broken. in the sense that a lot of times you'll hear people say like, well, if you signed the terms and conditions for something, then you're responsible for that. But there's a term that Doc Searls uses, Doc's out of Harvard. He calls that a legal term is a contract of adhesion. And the basic idea is it's sort of like, it's my way or the highway. You have to sign these terms or you can't use the service. Now, let me be clear. Of course, organizations and governments, what are they going to do, right? They need to have legal terms and they say, please use these terms. So I'm not saying that those are not important, but to only allow users to basically use a massive platform, whether it's Facebook or something else, it's also not a good way to imbue trust or have them use your product if they really want to use your product, but they're doing it in a way where they feel their data is going to be shared in ways where they don't understand how it's going to be used for second or third parties, and especially how it may be used for, in perpetuity. Meaning for the rest of time, especially when you hear things like, a couple of years ago, there was a famous guitar app. And to download the guitar app, you signed a consent form where for free, you got to use the app, but they accessed all of your contact database, where it's like, why do you need my contact database for me to get a guitar app? Anyway, so now GDPR is certainly help the world understand, like, here's the benefits of how to better organize data. And granted, it's focused on European citizens and all that, but it's also an opportunity for clarity for how people's data is shared, and they can give more sense of their own terms and conditions through sovereign identity structures, through blockchain, etc. And even though it's a nascent industry, the opportunity to share data where an individual can tell what their terms and conditions are means that there are terms and conditions for a government or a business, and now we can have people at the center of their data where they can express their terms and conditions. It doesn't mean their terms and conditions are always met, but it's the only way to move forward in the algorithmic economy, where it's not just outside in tracking, which is fine, right? That brings a lot of benefits, but there's also inside out response. So, and we have a lot of standards working groups that we're focusing on IEEE to provide that focus on the individual. And again, it's not anti-business, it's not anti-government. For us, it's the only way that we can move forward, where actually there's more trust that's able to happen when individuals are able to better and more clearly state what they think the value is of their data. Thanks.
Very good. So, Omar?
Yeah, sure. So the way I like to approach this, it's more like from my practice standpoint, what we've done with privacy and the do's and don'ts we try to recommend and the way we see it. And stating again your question, and the way I understood it was, what is the current state of data capture management and use as it pertains to emotions? So usually when we come across with IT companies that are gathering data, the first thing we try to assess and try to know what to try to do is what kind of data they're getting. Especially when you're out there in the internet, not everyone's using their real name, not everyone's using their real identity, and not everyone's giving out their real information. So that's the first thing we try to acknowledge. If you're actually just getting real data, or you're getting data from a troll, or you're getting data from somewhere else, that's the first thing we try to assess. The second thing we try to do is to acknowledge that if you are actually gathering data from a person, first, it comes to territory, whether that person, it's inside your country or it's elsewhere. And that's where it gets complicated. Let's say right now we're in Mexico, but usually we get emails from cybersecurity companies in Spain and in the US asking with us to collaborate pertaining with certain legal issues that are coming across from those countries. So it's kind of interesting to see. You're not listening, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. My apologies. So the main challenge we're seeing here when it comes to access of that information is that it not necessarily comes within just one country. Right now, let's say in this conversation, each one of us, it's in a different country. So it's really hard to determine whether we're going to govern this conversation with the rules of Mexico or the rules of Google, just determine whether it says the terms and conditions that you're going to govern by the way they say. So what we try to do is just to state it, that it comes to four practical state. How the user is going to access that information. Is he able to access, once again, all that information you're gathering? 2, is he going to have the right to rectify and know where that information is? 3, how he has the right to cancel or be forgotten wherever that information was forgotten. Or 4, how he's going to oppose to say that information was not his. So the way we've seen it right now is that whether it's biometric information or whether it's personal data, it just comes to a territorial side of where was it gathered, whether it's going to be stored, and 3, how is the user then going to have the rights? So it's kind of interesting seeing that foreign companies, especially that are web-based, let's say Google, start gathering information from citizens across the world, but they're not necessarily complying with the rules within that territory. So it kind of comes to complexity, especially with cell phones that are having their sensors, and those sensors are gathering information inside countries, and that information is sent back to other countries. So the approach that we see is that right now, privacy needs to become not necessarily a territorial right, but more an international law, where you have a forum which states and governs the rights of the users.
Well, hey, George, can I jump in for a second here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because this is fascinating, right? Both what Omar was saying and what John was saying, I think are a wonderful sort of way to focus the conversation we were having at a broader level before they came on board. So we began talking about the emotional machines and the ability to capture emotions and how data feeds into that. Look, one of the things that all of us seem to keep saying over and over again, and I think it's so critically important, and John, you said this, in regards to privacy and what's going on globally with respect to that in different geographies. This notion of having some immutable means by which I can not only own my digital self, my behaviors, my emotions digitally, but also associate value with that digital self, I think is an extraordinary construct. And being able to somehow conceive of that, and I'm not familiar with everything IEEE is doing, but this is a much bigger initiative, obviously, that we need to address globally. Being able to take that and create some kind of a construct globally that we can all adhere to, where I can establish a value to my digital self and then somehow negotiate the terms of the use of that digital self and its value by others, I think is an enormous shift in power, right? Now, whether we do that through blockchain or whatever, there are mechanics here that need to be obviously figured out. But being able to do that in concept creates an enormous economic value and construct that everyone in the world suddenly has access to. It creates a whole new category of asset, a whole new economic variable. And I find that fascinating because in many ways, that could be the asset of the 21st century. Now, today, what's the value in one behavior and one contact list and all these fragmented things that my different digital providers own of me? It's tough to put a number on that, but I think we have to move towards that. And I was so glad to hear you say, John, that IEEE is actually moving in that direction, because I think we need that to build that momentum, right? To build some momentum and some practical infrastructure of what that means ultimately. If I can own my digital self, I now have an asset that anyone on the planet could own. And I think it really radically changes the way we might look at the economy of the 21st and 22nd century, if I can even be bold enough to go that far.
Mm-hmm.
No, you make
if I may compliment, one of the ideas and that pops into my mind right now, it's back in the day when I was teaching legal informatics, I used to tell my students about the future of a digital identity, as we have a social security number, how in the future we needed to determine a single number with a single identity that could keep track of every single thing as well you're doing, but in a secure manner as any other human right you have. Yeah. Especially because right now we're generating so much information out there, just even your family pictures. And right now, all the companies are just governing themselves within their terms and conditions, saying that whether you want to use my technology, I keep to get your data. But then that's when you have to come up with a different approach into the human rights, because the essence of the human rights, the way it was written with the essential rights we had conceived with the technology we had back in the day. Right now, that human right has increased, And as humans, we're right now not governing domains, not only in the digital industry, as well in the nano industry and in the spatial industry. So there are several things that need to govern. And in summary, it really gets what you mentioned. And the way I would summarize it, and I would propose it, was with approach of a digital identity, not given out by a nation, but given out by an autonomous entity.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, just to add to that, in terms of the autonomy, I used to work in PR. I was an EVP of a top 10 PR firm. And even 10 years ago, I would ask my friends who understood advertising in terms of how things are bought and sold on the internet, because I didn't, but I knew CPMs, which is called cost per thousand. Even 10 years ago, like when Facebook, 8 or 9 years ago, whenever I was still in PR, Facebook would change their algorithm and the cost for CPMs for our clients would go up. I worked with like HP and Gillette. And all that means is, it costs more and more to sort of cost of acquisition to get in front of your consumer, to say like on Facebook, Gillette has an ad and they want that ad to be seen, right? But I kept telling my friends, I'm like, hey, every time the algorithm changes, our cost goes up and the CPMs become less valuable. That was a trend that didn't change. And what that meant to me then is I was like, okay, that means that more and more data about humans in one sense is really a commodity, right? Meaning right now there are millions of algorithms tracking me. So to an earlier point that was made in terms of getting access to my data, it's simple, right? It's paying the right second or third party data broker for the report about my data. However, and this is after years of thinking on this stuff, right? You're not really going to fight. And in one sense, it's not about fighting, right? I don't want to make it sound adversarial. It's not about fighting any organization, Google, Facebook, a brand, right? You don't want to fight them. You want to use their great services, right? But there's a couple things. One is when you're tracked, a lot of times in AI, right? A lot of the work that's being done now is about algorithmic bias. A lot of times there's simply just error, right? Like we don't talk about error a lot because the database has error that says maybe I live in Massachusetts. I actually today live in New Jersey, but I did live in Massachusetts. If I could access that data and correct it, first of all, the AI could evolve in ways that simply is a lot more correct, right? But if I don't even have access to my data, which is the beginning aspect of a lot of these ownership discussions, that can't happen. Secondly is actual ownership of data. Although in some countries like Estonia, they have that, which is fantastic. It makes things a lot simpler when a citizen in Estonia owns their data and then they get a phone call or a text from their doctor saying, hey, can I access your data? That again is back to the relationship and trust. And you ask your doctor, why are you accessing the data? And they say, well, because of your heart condition. Now it's at that point, maybe I don't have a heart condition and I can say, I don't have a heart condition. They can go, oh, I'm so sorry. We were looking at the wrong record, right? So the conversation that can happen builds trust. And then if they are looking for heart information, if it is me, I can say, hey, thanks for checking. What are you using it for, right? So I own the data. Now, in situations where, like, say, in the US, I don't own my data, then you have to kind of think about data as sort of ownership, almost like copyright, meaning who's the original creator of the data, me as the individual, but then how, because I'm using all these awesome services, am I saying they can use the data? That's kind of a different conversation. But the thing about having a trusted identity source, where again, you have your own terms and conditions, one clear thing that's very different, right? Because I forget if someone's used the phrase yet, hey, the horse has left the barn. All the data about me is out there, right? However, the critical thing to ask, and a lot of times people ask with privacy, they say, what do you have to hide? My question about the larger issue of data in general is, what is ours to reveal? And by that, I mean, there's things about us based on our values that you can't actually find out from tracking. So for instance, is a person Jewish or is a person gay, right? You might be able to track and say with 98% assurance, we're pretty sure this person is Jewish. They speak on Twitter using, Hebrew characters. They on Saturdays are tracked through GPS about going to the synagogue. But the person might say, I have a lot of Jewish family and friends. I go to synagogue because I work there on Saturday, but I'm actually a Buddhist. who is the person that actually gets to say who they are in terms of their values? That's the individual. So part of those terms and conditions, it's also about digital and algorithmic democracy. I might be tracked and everyone can say that guy's a Republican. He's a Republican. But when I go to the voting booth, and more that's going to be digital or virtual, at the instant that I press a key to vote in whatever country for whatever I'm voting for, at that moment, the only person who actually is voting is me. And maybe I change. Maybe seconds ago I was a Republican, but I pressed the button and I'm a Democrat. So a lot of what I'm talking about too, these terms and conditions, it's a yes and. We're tracked, and that's great. It helps us recognize our actions and behavior. It knows us better than we know ourselves in one sense. But the terms and conditions is also about not just reflecting our values, but showing the rest of the world you can't commoditize my core values. You can track and people can sell that information or buy it. But at the end of the day, if a brand or a government really wants a relationship with me, they have to reach out the hand digitally or algorithmically and say, what do you think, John? What are your values? And without the technology of like a blockchain or sovereign structures, et cetera, around that, that won't happen. It will always just be outside in versus inside out. And once we have that inside out thing, and then I'll end on this, that is where then actual commercial or economic structures can change, like universal basic income. Then a person could actually say, these are the aspects of my identity, like, your image being used like a Screen Actors Guild actor, which I used to be. Then you can say, this is how these aspects of my data I allow to be monetized in ways that legally I can, right? You don't want someone to be able to sell all their data, even though they could be able to, because it's the equivalent of someone like, harvesting their organs, right? Like, just because you can harvest your organs doesn't mean that legally you allow someone. But all that is to say, the inside out ability that I'm talking about means that we are not commoditized anymore.
So I'm just gonna to follow up on that, the blockchain. What role does the blockchain play in this? I know you mentioned it a little bit, but can you elaborate on that? I'm curious.
Sure. For me, there's great organizations like one called MEECO, MEECO.me. There's another one called Sovrin, SOVRIN. And using blockchain-like structures, the logic is when I share a certain amount of data with a business or government, I'm only sharing the finite amount of data that needs for that transaction to happen. So I gave the example before of a guitar app. If someone wants to sell me a guitar app or give it to me for free, cool. But then either they should charge me, or they can say, this is the data that we'd like. And I can say, no, I'm not going to give you my entire contact database. I have 10 friends who play guitar. Do you want their data? And the logic then is through that peer-to-peer one-time exchange of that finite amount of data, that exchange then goes out onto this idea of ledger. And here's where, if your blockchain experts are listening, I'm making some of this wrong, forgive me. But the basic idea is then trust is increased because it's the exchange that becomes public, not the actual data that's exchanged. But it's more about retraining people that you only have to share. It's bargaining, right? How do you build trust with someone? Is you come to the table and you both negotiate so that you feel comfortable about that exchange. But then the trust happens. And I'm so excited for this era when we stop hearing the message of trust X organization as they protect your data. That's table stakes. It's a given. Any organization has to have cybersecurity and GDPR. That's not a differentiator. That's like saying, we don't murder people. Well, good. Glad to hear you don't murder people. That's just what you have to do. The real people who will be innovative in business are the ones who say this trusted identity, the sovereign blockchain mentality is what we're going to provide for our consumers or our citizens so they can have a voice and a genuine digital algorithmic exchange of ideas and data.
Very good.
So can I change tracks a little bit?
Yeah.
I have a funny question. So going through all this, and by the way, all this is very, very exciting and very valuable stuff. But if we were to throw a question saying that does AI need to learn empathy? Would that be a valid question?
I think it'll be incredibly valid if I can jump in, Sunil.
Yep.
And I'm thinking from the perspective of an educator and having worked with students, and John, again, having been vice president for IEEE educational activities for the last couple of years, where we've served an audience ranging from pre-university students all the way to continuing professional education and engineers. I know we've been doing some great work with you, developing courses related to AI and autonomous systems and so forth. That to me is one of the most important things that you hit upon, Sunil. In other words, we're born curious, right? We're all very inquisitive. And when I think about education, and you go into a kindergarten class, and the students are not afraid to ask you why the sky is blue or why the stars are bright at night. And somehow, as an educator, I'd love to see that continue throughout the student's journey, because learning never stops. Right? I mean, as Yeats had said, it's not the filling of a pail, but lighting of a spark. And can we somehow foster that using these technologies? Again, keeping in mind what Tom said about immutability, and keeping in mind that the person who is undergoing that experience still has control over their digital self, and they choose to reveal, there's informed consent. They are in complete control of how that information is presented, how it's going to be used. I think there's a lot of room for that, and we're barely scratching the surface. 20 years from now, it'll be ethically aligned design version 22, John, and it'll have lots of different inputs from experts around the world, because that is the way we learn and grow. And to me, that is the key. That is the key to success. I mean, the program that I'm running right now, AIM Squared, Attract, Inspire, Mentor, and Support Students, focuses very specifically on that. First generation students, first in their families to go to college. What is it that we can provide to support them, right? So yes, we're collecting data, but it's informed consent. I mean, they tell us, go before a human subjects review panel that very carefully scrutinizes what information is being collected, how it's being used, and they have complete control over that, right? So I completely agree with you. I think that's something that we need to continue to work on to improve how technology can serve society. I mean, I always think that, advancing technology for humanity is our tagline. We can never forget who we are doing this for, right? We are in control. We are in charge. We're using technology to serve humanity. That's not the other way around.
Yeah. So George, come in.
Yeah, I just didn't want to overtalk. But yeah, that's fantastic what you said. I mean, 2 books ago, I wrote a book called Hacking Happiness, which a lot of it was about studying quantified self and how sensors can really identify aspects of our well-being through physiology that we may not recognize. Stress, certainly elevated aspects of what would equate to happiness. And anytime that humans can be reminded or taught sort of empathy, in the sense of, empathy, sympathy, etc., I think AI as a teacher of humans for emotional intelligence writ large is one of the biggest opportunities of the tech. And the work you're doing, I just couldn't applaud you enough in terms of especially thinking about how young people use these technologies. Emotion AI as a space. I was at a great conference that Rana El-Kaloubi ran, and she's the CEO of Affectiva, and she's working with Rosalind Picard, who I'm not worthy, the sort of creator of effective computing. I think there's this big difference in robotic terms. It's called nudging versus manipulation. And robotic nudging is much like when, through Alcoholics Anonymous, you have a friend who says, hey, be careful, you said you didn't want to drink. Or Weight Watchers, you can have an app that basically reminds you, like, don't touch the cake, move away from the cake, right? This is nudging, because to your point, it's informed consent. You know how your data is being shared. You've agreed to it, right? That's critical. But then you're also allowing the sort of empathetic reminders that, hey, this is something you said at least before you did or didn't want to do. That's very different. It's 180 degrees different from when someone's data is misused, or when there's, say, a companion robot with the elderly or with kids. And even when that data is, said, okay, you can use my data for X, without that blockchain type thing where you can remove that data,
right,
then that's where manipulation can happen, where, we're very easy to manipulate humans, even through unintended ways. And
Yes.
if you don't test these different devices, especially around kids and the elderly, then there's a good chance that they will be hurt. And again, this is when someone can, say they can have great intentions for creating technology with emotion, but, and this is also critical, if I look right away on people's boards, I go to a website and I go right to their board of directors. Do they have clinical psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists? Do they have sociologists? Do they have deep expertise in the actual formal study of psychology and humans, versus like one guy who, or one woman who took like, a sociology class in college and then everyone else is technologists? That's where danger can happen. And I say this with a love for engineers and programmers. Get those people on your boards and get those people when you're designing, which again, a lot of people do that. But if you don't, then that's a huge red flag for me, because it means you're designing for humans. That's like, building for a part for a car and only having one person who actually knows about a car amongst 40 people creating a product for a car. Humans are a very specific thing to design for, especially when it comes to emotion.
So I'll just put in a little, a last thought, because Tom and I were having a conversation before we started, and at NetTech, we do emotion recognition, and I was telling Tom that one of our business partners had a good perspective on looking at this, which is, this is somebody who's not a psychologist. He's not trained as one, but he is a human, and his comment was very human, which was, since I've been doing this, or since I've been working at NetTech, I feel I'm becoming a better human because I've had to become more curious about what we're doing, and I've become more aware of my own emotions and all other people's emotions just from the work that we're doing. And I said, and when I heard that, I was like, that's the big picture. I said, that's what we're doing. I mean, we're not optimizing processes and recruitment or stuff like that. I mean, that's something that can happen, but the big picture is, can we help people become more aware of not their emotions, but also other people's emotions? In essence, that's when transformation is going to happen.
Well said.
Yeah, I love that. I was commenting to George that I love that notion, that concept of giving me the ability to sort of amplify my humanity, my awareness through the technology. Because ultimately, I don't care if it's a rock smashing another rock, or a bow and arrow, or a neural network, or these are tools that amplify our humanity at the end of the day. And that sounds soft, that sounds fuzzy, but you know what? That is the path that we've been on. Civilization has hopefully created a world that is more aware, is more inclusive of ideas, and this gives us the ability to continue on that path. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. At the same time, I have to say this because it is so easy to lose sight of as we sit here with our high-tech devices in our comfortable places around the world, that the majority of humanity still is concerned about their safety, their identity, their economic, day-to-day, hour-to-hour existence and subsistence, basic healthcare and sanitation. And the things we're talking about, AI, I do believe, may be the only way to scale what we have for 10 billion people. I think we've reached the end of the industrial era. I think these, what Karl Popper, one of my favorite information philosophers of the last century, when he talked about clocks and clouds, we've addressed everything as a cloud problem. That was the industrial era, and it worked wonderfully. We scaled factories, we built infrastructure, we built transportation. If we keep doing that, we're going to destroy the planet and ourselves in the process. So we're making this shift to these emergent cloud problems that can only truly be understood with AI. And I think bringing into that conversation things like empathy and emotion are very, very important, but also realizing that we are going to be able to elevate a part of humanity that simply has had no ability to enter the economic mainstream, that has had no identity, that has been totally invisible. up until now, those are all very, very important things as well. So as we toy with Maslow's hierarchy and talk about the empathy and the emotions and the important things that maybe are further towards the top of that pyramid, I think we also need to realize that we are elevating those who are at the bottom of the pyramid and giving them an opportunity to climb a few rungs higher up on that ladder. And I think all of those are very human endeavors and very worthwhile, but they certainly span the spectrum from emotions and empathy to basic subsistence, and we're addressing all of them, I think, with things like AI. If I can be so bold as to make that claim.
So I have a quick closing story, if I may take the opportunity. And I was very fascinated listening to a very recent sort of a panel discussion. And, there was this, many people talked at length on the fact that technology was taking over and AI is becoming very, very popular. And, when these kind of conversations happen, you are not very far away from somebody asking you a question that, when is it that machines will take over human beings? And there's somebody called Sadhguru, Jaggi Vasudev. Ramesh, I'm sure you've heard of him. And he came in to speak way more than halfway into the panel discussion, very quietly. He said, I think what we are talking about is a slightly different sort of question, and it may be the wrong question. So he said, we've made lots and lots and lots and lots of investment into technology, but what we've been doing is we've been programming machines, creating algorithms, and we've been talking about machines becoming self-aware. And he says we must listen to or try to understand that self-awareness in human beings does not come from the mind or the intellect, but it comes from something called the consciousness. And he says when you look at consciousness, consciousness is way beyond, you may even look at it as a funny, fuzzy concept and say it comes out of some place that is scientifically not easy to prove. But he said the reason we are where we are today is because we've made tremendous investments in time, money, effort, and the belief in putting money behind technology, because we believe that that's the route or the route we should take. And he says the only way that we are going to be able to get human beings to the position that they should have always occupied and will always occupy is by all of us trying to make investments into consciousness. So he says, once we start investing into consciousness like we invested into technology, the whole game will change. And technology will then augment, instead of calling it artificial intelligence, then you will be calling it augmented intelligence, much like what they saw in the Brazil World Cup, where you had an exoskeleton, where a completely paralyzed physical being was able to kick the ball off. You know, so I mean that's like the big consciousness question that came up. I thought that was amazingly fascinating. And then the last bit of my story is that just yesterday we were having a big debate at my office, which is Idea Farms, and we're doing a public workshop on empathy, basically. And I kind of, in some sense, challenged myself because I said, well, we keep talking about empathy. It's at a very intellectual level. We talk about empathy. And guess what came out, you know? I'm not even sure whether this is the right answer or it's just a different track that we took. What came out of the discussion was that probably empathy has nothing to do with the mind. The mind cannot understand empathy. So there's something more. So if I tie the two together, there may be something about consciousness and empathy that's worth leaving on the table and thinking about, although that kind of puts a very different spin on this whole discussion on technology, ethics, and emotion. But thank you very much. I loved being on the chat.
Likewise.
Ditto.
Gentlemen, do you have any last comments? I mean, because I know some people have to leave, and I don't want to take too much of your time.
My comment is done, right? I gave my last comment, I guess.
Okay.
So, George and Sunil, I would say that this is the beginning of the conversation.
Yes.
We have a long ways to go. The ideas that we've discussed and shared today have been incredibly important and will continue to guide us. You know, empathy and consciousness, these are not things that can be easily, made using technology. Technology can mimic, but we have a long ways to go. What we need to do is to continue to question, the IEEE is certainly leading the way, and John is taking a leadership role in that as the chair of that committee, executive director of that committee. We need to continue to educate, because by educating, by listening to one another, we will continue to learn and support each other. So thanks again for having me on this, and look forward to working with all of you. It's a great journey. Hang on, fasten your seatbelts.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be on the panel.
Thank you. Tom?
So it's wonderful to share time with such brilliant minds. I am humbled and awed and fascinated all at the same time. Look, at the end of the day, the only thing that to me is certain is that I will be surprised in ways that I can't even begin to conceive of by where this technology will take us, and ultimately where we as human beings will evolve because of it. The journey for me is never long enough. I'm always wondering what's beyond the next horizon. And right now, I'm lucky if I can see 5 to 10 years out into the future, much less 20 to 30 to 50, which is probably going to take. But hopefully, with the assistance of some of this technology, maybe we will all live that long, and we will all maintain our youthful curiosity as we continue on that journey. It's fascinating stuff. Look, I think at the end of the day, the net positive, there will be negatives out of all of what we talk about. There will be threats. There will be a lot of things that we can be fearful of, but it's always the net positive that moves technology along. And that net positive, that slight profit that we eke out of technology and progress, is all we need to keep moving forward. And I think we're certainly on our path to doing that.
Thank you, and good luck for your book, Tom.
Thank you.
Indeed, yes.
looking forward to more comments from all of you on this. I'll get copies out to everyone too. Please send me your addresses via email so I can get a copy to you. Thank you very much for having me on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
John, okay. So, John, any closing comments?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And again, echoing also, fantastic to hear all these awesome viewpoints and brilliance. In my last book, I used a question that I'll leave everyone with, which is, how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves? And I asked that question because the technology is glorious, what it can already do. And I think when amplifying our willingness to be introspective is a fantastic tool. I think for the technology that we even have today, it's not even AI. The temptation for humans, I know for myself, I get off this call and my kids will be around later and I'll be checking my email instead of speaking to them. And I think the question right now today for society is, on an individual level, but then also societally, is what are the things that we don't want to necessarily give away, right? Like, we use GPS for driving. I don't think anyone's lamenting paper-based maps. You're not sitting there saying, oh no, I missed maps. But how that actually drove our car, the same types of technologies can drive our lives, and that could be very good. But I think the thing that we have to be careful of is sort of waking up 5 or 10 years from now and saying, I didn't even realize that was, quote, taken from me. I didn't mean to give it away, and that may be too late. So these types of conversations and the work that we're all obviously working on together means that effective computing, AI, is something that can be additive to our personal introspective journeys versus something that may influence the point where it is manipulation, as it were, not evilly intended, but something where we aren't giving ourselves the time and realizing the worth that we have as individuals, so we can say, well, these are my values, so that then when the technology comes in, it really mirrors what we already have decided and amplifies it versus confuses. Anyway, so thank you for the work you're doing, and really thrilled to be a part of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Omar, any last words from you?
Microphone. It's muted. Your microphone is muted.
Technology.
Now it is. Yeah, so I was telling guys that I learned a bunch from everyone. I was trying to be a big listener more than a big talker. And I'm pretty sure Jorge is impressed. I'm usually the one that talks a bunch in the group. Right now I was trying to follow, and a lot of interesting information. And I'd just like to make my statement, like from a company standpoint and kind of the thoughts I share out with the group. What we do, it's emotional AI, and it started out gathering EEG information to measure emotion. And our president's calling the other line. My apologies.
No problem.
And one of the first things that came across my mind when we're starting to do the business was asking the question of how we were going to use the data. It was just not getting the EEG to measure the biometric information. It was what we're going to do with that information, how we're going to store it, and what's the limit that we're going to be doing. And it was really hard to me to tell the company we have to have an ethical procedure to actually know when we shut it down, when we share the information, with whom we share it. And even we came up with the idea of forming a new nonprofit, which we call the Emotions Observatory, just to give it out to the academics and ethicists to make the right decisions of how this information is going to be shared. So sometimes all of this excites me because it sounds like futurism, but it's actually already happening. And right now we do this as a startup company with a lot of low budget. And it's really exciting to actually listen to arguments that 20 years from now, a lot of things, people need to make the right choices. It's something that John mentioned. And it was really strange. And this is in Tijuana, Mexico. No longer than 6 months ago, we were having this focus group in a fair shop. And this youngster came by and sat down at the computer. And when we gave him out the privacy statement, letting him know what we're going to do with information, it was kind of interesting that he just kind of looked at me and say, "This is the new world order. I'm not doing this." And stopped and walked away. And it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting because we've really struggled. We're all the time in the lab talking about how we're going to use it, how this might empower new generations with mindfulness applications. And we really see that it may be like a good application that would help people to really fully understand not only how you use emotions to sell or how you use emotions to do something else, but how you use emotions to fully understand. You mentioned conscience, we mentioned humanist, we mentioned ethics, but that's what really excites me about this opportunity, getting you guys to know. And of course that in the future, we'd like to just get your feedback as well, because there's something we usually struggle and get in fights with the business people, because on the side, from the business standpoint, is we want to make profits. Where's the economy? Where's the data economy? But from an ethics standpoint, you go like, you know what? This is value information you're gathering. On the other hand, we start doing research. We're still far from having sensitive data. All we have is just the alpha wave of an individual which you could say that it's an emotion or it's something else. So I also feel that we're way behind of how we're going to be able to actually measure emotions in an accurate way and determine whether that person, it's X, Y, and Z pathology or it's maybe a criminal. And that's something where I put out there like something I like to call the future of data management, which we call the legal agents. And it's just to put something out there for your thoughts. The way I see it, and someone asking, so we teach advanced AI ethics? I think we should. But it's a hard question because that comes into coding. How you're going to code ethics? What are the classes of information you're going to define within ethics? So that comes up that you're going to have tons of people classifying ethics from different standpoints. Then you're going to have AI classifiers that are going to classify those things and determine whether they can apply or not. But I definitely think that there should be taught ethics, but as well, since like a judge said back in the 60s, legal should also evolve into AI. It should become into the jurometric system. And the jurometric system is when you start adding up math and AI into law, not only to the ethics from a standpoint, but also to have legal agents that will be able to shut it down from a legal standpoint and a technical way as well.
I think John's bailed out, and thank you very much. I think we've done a kickoff of the EMTV as an emotion empathy TV, and hopefully we'll make a big wave of something like this because I think it's very relevant. And thank you very much, Ramesh, Omar, John, for joining us. And George, thanks so much for initiating this and taking this forward. I think a whole lot of thanks for the whole effort of putting all this together, George. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys.
Great meeting you guys.
Thank you guys. Have a good one. And I'll share the link with you tomorrow.
All right. Buenos dias.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.